everyone, I hope you're doing okay. My name is Lucille and I've recently moved from France to Canada. Today I'm bringing you my December reading journal update. First, I'm going to do 2 review spreads. I did a third one in December, but I didn't film it because I didn't feel like it. And the rest of the video is going to be me filling in my yearly trackers, my yearly challenges, and finishing them up. I'll also do my 2024 reading wrap-up in the journal, and I will show you what are my favorite reads for this year. The first book I'm doing is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I listened to it on audiobook. It's an audiobook from the website LibriVox, and I'm not sure if I've talked about LibriVox before, but I listened to another LibriVox audiobook this year. It was The Odd Women by George Gissing. LibriVox is a website where volunteers record books that are on the public domain, so you can have access to it for free. And the link for this version of the audiobook is going to be in the description. I say version because sometimes for the most famous classics, the most popular ones, you may have several different recordings, ones with a cast for it or just with one narrator. The one I listened to is narrated by Elizabeth Klett, and I've listened to quite a few of Elizabeth Klett's LibriVox audiobooks, and I've also listened to one of hers on Audible, I think, and I usually really like her narration. I read Jane Eyre in French when I was a teenager and I really loved it. Then at university I had a course about Jane Eyre and I didn't feel like reading it up in English. I wanted something different, so I decided to listen to the complete audiobook, and I also really enjoyed it. In fact, Jane Eyre was one of my favorite books. And then this summer, or no, more in September, we needed something to listen to go on a road trip, and we started with Jane Eyre. And I knew that the first few chapters were quite not difficult to listen to, but they were they're not my favorite. They've never been my favorite. And I was really not having a good time. My friend wasn't having a good time, so we decided to cut it out and not listen to the rest of the audiobook. And I had such a bad time with the first few chapters when she is a kid and at Lowood School that I decided not to listen to it, not to finish it. And I had been wanting to listen to it or reread it for years, so that was saying something. But at some point in October, I think, or November, I decided that after all, I wanted to finish it. And I pushed through the first few chapters where Jane Eyre is at Lowood School, and then I arrived to the main events of the novel. If you've never heard of Jane Eyre, it's a Victorian novel who follows Jane Eyre. She's the narrator. The novel starts when she's a child and she's living with her aunt and her awful cousins, and she is moved to a school that's not much better, and then she becomes the governess at the house of Mr. Rochester. And this used to be one of my favorite books. But this time, oh my god, I want to subtitle Jane Eyre, Cry Me a River. Every time something good is happening, you know that in a few paragraphs, Jane is going to be like, but in fact, I was super unhappy, and this wasn't going well, and this wasn't going well, and this was creepy, and I wasn't happy, and you're like, oh my god, girl, wow. And then Mr. Rochester came into the scene, and I hated him. Oh my god, I hated him. He's such a manipulative, annoying brat. He's going on and on about Jane being like a fairy, and what's very funny is that sometimes Jane just comes to him to ask him a very prosaic question, and he starts on a monologue about something else, and she's just standing there thinking, I'm tired, can I go to bed? Is it finished? Can I go to bed? And you're supposed to think that they are the most romantic couple ever to have been created. And wow. So Rochester, he's 20 years older than her, so he could be her father. Jane has never had a relationship in her life. She's barely 18. She's never talked to a man, really. And of course, she's intrigued by Rochester. She has this wild, imaginative mind, and he is striking her fancy. So she's intrigued by him, she falls in love with him. I don't have a problem with that because it seems logical in her character. But him, what a piece of shit, basically. He she's interested in him, and he confesses that he forces her to come and assist him even when she's uncomfortable because he wants to make her jealous. And even when he's sure that she's attached to him, he continues his little charade that he's engaged to someone else, and he's so mean to her and he plays with her emotions so much. And when she decides to leave the house because he has his wife locked in the attic, he really throws himself on the couch and starts pounding it and crying like a little baby. Wow, I knew I wanted to rant about it, but this was, and the whole story about Rochester's wife being locked in the attic because she basically wanted to have sex a lot is just, you're supposed to pity Rochester. And you're thinking about this poor woman in the attic, and Charlotte Bronte is describing her, she's not describing her as a human being, she's describing her as a creature, as a monster. She has no compassion for her. Jane is disgusted by her because she's not pretty, and wow, that was an ordeal. And when she leaves the house finally and she escapes because she doesn't want to stay, I was so impressed by her because Rochester is like, you have no family, who cares if you stay with me even if I'm still married? And she's like, that's true, I don't have any friends, who cares? And she comes up with that sentence I was so impressed by. She says, I care about my soul, I care about myself, I'm gonna leave because of me. And that was, for a supposed romantic novel from the 19th century, such an impressive line, and I was so impressed by her character. I knew she was going back to him at the end, but it's on her terms, but I really wished she hadn't. She flees, she ends up with her cousins by mistake, and she ends up with another abusive, manipulative guy in St. John, and he was so mean to her. And what was very interesting is that she knew he was not good for her, that he was manipulative, that she would be so unhappy to be his wife, and she was so clear about that, and she was on the brink of falling into this. And I'm so sorry, I haven't talked about the design of the page, but I really wanted to rant about that book and how I've never really read a dark romance before, but this has all the hallmarks of what I associate with dark romance. They're clearly not good for each other. He manipulates her, but she forgives him, and they have a very unhealthy relationship. It's all dark and moody, and it's really not my thing. I like when people are happy, when people are nice to each other, when they don't manipulate people and make people unhappy. The spread I'm really happy about, on the other hand. I knew I had a lot to say about, so I did this little flap where I cut up the top of the page, as I had seen in some of Jessica Round's bullet journal videos, because I wanted to write the title once and be able to see it on all my pages. I wanted a very simple design because for me Jane Eyre is the epitome of the Victorian novel. So when I think about a Victorian woman, I think about pressed flower and a journal and paintings, and Jane is an artist. So I used some pressed flower and leaf sticker from Journal Say. I also used some illustrations from Jane Eyre I found on Pinterest. And I was really surprised when I really ended up liking using the frame I put on the left page. I thought it was looking really nice, but I didn't have another frame from Journal Say that would look great for the second illustration I had in mind. So I went on Canva, found a frame I kind of liked that was gold, and I tweaked the settings to print it kind of in black and white to make it seem like it was a silver frame. And I'm really happy about that design. As you would have seen in the beginning of the video, I printed the title using a font on Canva that I don't remember the name of, so I will have it on screen. And I used my light pad to transfer it to the background paper I was using because I didn't trust myself to be able to letter it, and I didn't want to spend too much time doing it, so I think that's okay. Now, the next part I'm doing is for The Broken Wings by Khalil Gibran. and I've been practicing saying his name, but the KH sound in Arabic is quite hard for me to say, so I hope you will forgive me. For the end of the year, I wanted to read books from different countries I had never read from before for my Reading the World challenge, and I had already tried in October to read a novel by a Lebanese author, but I got so confused by that novel and I just didn't want to force myself to read it. And I thought, I know of another Lebanese author, Khalil Gibran, and I might try to read him. And I found The Broken Wings when I went on Gibran's biography. And The Broken Wings, I decided upon this one because it was a short one, a novella, and it was available on Kobo for a few cents. And I really enjoyed it. It's set in the beginning of the 20th century in Lebanon, and I loved the description of the Lebanese countrysides, the mountains, the flowers. I would have loved to have the whole novella be that. And the story is that our unnamed narrator meets a man that's an old friend of his father, and when he visits him, he meets this man's daughter and he falls in love with her. And it gets complicated, and I don't want to spoil you, but I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting. The way Gibran was talking about Lebanon was beautiful, and I wish I could read more novels that are set in the mountains with all the flowers. And I was quite surprised by not by the ending, but by the way the novel was just before the ending. I would not have expected that. And I feel that Gibran's writing was really beautiful, but sometimes he was quite repetitive with his narrator's feelings. He has a lot of feelings and he wants to tell you he's very lonely, and being lonely is terrible, and I get it, but after Jane Eyre, that was a lot of pathos and Cry Me a River. It was also funny when the guy was trying to tell the woman he's in love with that he has it harder than her when she's forced into a marriage she doesn't want, because he's a man and he's gonna be without her, but she will have a family. She doesn't want to be married, and you're like, okay. And she even tells him, okay, don't do that, dude. It's not true. You don't have it harder than me. I will be wanting to read more of Khalil Gibran, so if you have any recommendation, tell me in the comments. For the spread, I immediately thought of those green letter stickers. They're really pale green and I love that color. And I thought they would go well with the nature theme of the novel. I can't give you the brand because I bought them secondhand. I thought about using some printouts of some pictures of mountains in Lebanon, but I ended up wanting to use those stickers from a riverside and some flowers. I thought they would go well with the colors of the titles and with the whole atmosphere of the novella. But I think that they take too much space, especially the pink flowers. They really go well with the color scheme of the whole spread, but I think that they take too much space on the page. It looks a bit clumsy, it looks a bit unbalanced. So I'm a bit disappointed about that, and I've been thinking about that spread ever since I've done it. I'm almost tempted to do it again, but I'm trying to refrain myself from doing that because I just want to stop going over everything I do because it's really tiring. I'd selected 2 quotes from the novella I really liked. The first one was, "Love provided me with a tongue and tears," and "Spring is beautiful everywhere, but it is most beautiful in Lebanon." And after reading all those descriptions about the flowers and the mountains, I'm tempted to agree with Gibran. It was really breathtaking, and even if I wasn't a fan of the emo boy routine of the narrator, it made me think of a novella I read last year by Alexandre Dumas, and I think in English it's called The Woman with the Velvet Necklace. And I liked it because they're romantic young men who fall in love with women they can't have, and it's not something that I usually enjoy, seeing boys being miserable because he can't have a woman, but this was really nicely done, and this is the first Lebanese novel I've ever read, so I was quite excited. After finishing the spread for that novel, I wanted to update my Reading the World challenge. It's in my previous reading journal. I set it up on camera when I did my reading journal makeover, and the video will be linked. I created my Reading the World challenge, Lire le Monde, a few years back when I decided I would like to read at least one book per country in the world. And it's hard to get one list of the different countries in the world because sometimes they're not recognized by some countries, they're not recognized by the UN. But so I kind of made up my own list after studying a few other lists. Now, at the beginning of 2024, I had read 43 novels from 43 different countries. And this year I read a novel from Saudi Arabia, one from Uganda, and one from Lebanon. And when I set up that page, I wasn't sure how to decorate it, so I had it left mostly blank, and I'm not sure why I lost the footage when I did decorate the bottom of the page, but I just used some paper tape, some craft paper tape, and some grid craft tape from Journal Say. I used some washi stickers that are impressionist paintings to add a little color and also to recall the other washi sticker I had used for the title. I wanted to have a way to display my counts evolving throughout the years, and I wanted a way to display the novels I was reading. At the beginning of that sequence, I was writing the name of the novels in pen, but I didn't end up liking it, and then I had an idea. I realized that there was a blank page, my last blank page of this reading journal, after that map, and I thought I would put the books on that page and just leave the bottom of that page for the counts of the countries evolving. So I will have space for a few more years, and I will continue to use that reading journal and to update that spread throughout the years. So I needed two labels, one for 2023 and one for 2024. On that page, I wanted to add the covers of the books I had read in 2024. At first, I thought that maybe I would add more years like 2021, 2022, etc. and add books I had read for this challenge on this page, but I didn't end up wanting to print more covers and having to cut them up, so I just did 2024. Now I'm updating my reading brackets spread, and I was really excited because I've never done a reading bracket before and a book bracket before, and I had set it up like I think in September, and I love how the spread looks like, but it's been challenging to choose just one book a month and then have this book going against another book, because choosing one book, that's never happened to me, just having one most favorite book for a year. I read so many genres, so many different things, that choosing just one book is super hard. I wanted to try it out for this year, but I'm not sure I'm going to do it for 2025. And the book I ended up choosing is called Wiggins et la nuit de l'éclipse, Wiggins and the Night of the Eclipse by Béatrice Nicodème. It's a French novel set in the universe from Sherlock Holmes, and it follows one of Sherlock Holmes' irregulars called Wiggins, and it was such a nice novel. I love reading anything about Sherlock Holmes, so I was really happy to read it, and also it had been in my TBR for so long, I was really proud of myself. The next spread I'm updating is my reading year, Une année de lecture. It's basically a calendar where I've used some colors to show how long it took me to read certain books. I haven't written down the title of the books associated with the colors because I thought it would be too busy, and I was finally able to print the second part of that spread, and as you would have seen, there was some white on the left of the calendar I printed because I didn't have enough of tea stained paper left, but I didn't want to be making more tea stained paper at that time. I just wanted to be finished, so I glued part of it on some white paper, and I think it's really fine. Now I'm updating my spreads about my TBRs. When I moved to Canada, I only took one book for my TBR, one book from physical TBR, so I didn't end up reading a lot from it. This year I went from 28 books to 25, and I'm still happy about it. My parents brought me a few books from my TBR, so now I'm going to be able to read more of them in 2025. I also did the total of my digital TBR. I went from 45 digital books to 39, and that was from reading but also from decluttering. I bought some digital books this year, but I read them straight away, so they didn't add anything to the count, and my digital TBR is a bit high for my taste, but I'm trying to feel that it's okay because it doesn't take any space on my shelves. And it's really weird to say that I decluttered some books from my e-reader, because really you can't really get rid of them because you always have them on the website where you bought them, but I just decided I wasn't going to read some titles. So I also wanted to finish that page where I decided to glue a cover for each of the books I read this year. I've talked about that a lot of times. I didn't have enough space to have the complete year, but that's okay with me. And I'm happy to have finished this spread. So before I'm doing my 2024 wrap-up, I wanted to finish my cover page for December, and I didn't have a cover page, so to speak. I just decided to use the bottom half of this page, that was the cover page from November, for my books for December. And I thought that maybe I would have space for both the covers of the books and little statistics. But first of all, I realized that I really don't care about statistics. And you'll realize there are more books on this spread that I showed you. So first of all, Jane Eyre, I finished it in November, but I didn't have time to include it in my November reading journal update. And in December, I have 2 audiobooks as well as a graphic novel. I have 2 Agatha Christie's audiobooks, Death on the Nile and Death in Mesopotamia, I think. That's the spread I did off camera and that I will show you at the end of the video with the flip through. So as you can see, I didn't have any space left, so I didn't want to add the statistics, and I also had the realization that I don't like to add statistics monthly. I like my yearly statistics. Off camera, I decided what were my favorite reads of the year. So obviously I have the book that won the book bracket, Wiggins and the Night of the Eclipse. I also have 2 books that are rereads. They're called La Quête d'Ewilan, Ewilin's Quest, and Le Pacte des Marchambres, The Marchambres Pact by Pierre Bottero. I reread all of the series set in the same universe called Gwendalavir at the beginning of the year before I left for Canada, and I couldn't have done it afterwards because I have all the physical copies, and this is 6, 8, 9 books, so I wouldn't have had space to bring them with me, and I wouldn't have wanted to read them in a digital format because I still have the books I read when I was 15, when I first discovered the series. And Gwendalavir, if you're French and you're a reader that's almost the same age as me, you would have known about it. Ewilan is such a big fantasy series. I really enjoyed rereading it. I didn't like all the volumes, but the first volume of the first trilogy from Ewilan and the third volume of the Elanas trilogy were my favorite, and I could not have included them in that spread. I also have Maigret Voyage, Maigret is Traveling, by Georges Simenon. I did a spread about it and I talked about it in the previous update. I have Envers et contre tout by Efrosinia Karnavskaya, means Against Everything. It's a Russian memoirs about being in the Gulag for 30 years, and it is illustrated by the author, and it's 600 pages with 300 pages of illustrations, and it was so powerful. I also have a children's album called Night Owl. It's a little owl that wants to be a knight, and it's the cutest thing I've ever seen, and there's a new volume that came up at the end of the year, and I'm so getting that. I have also In Memory of Feast, that's a book of testimony of residential school survivors here in Canada, and it was so informative and so moving. I also talk about it in a previous update. I have Two Old Women by Velma Wallace, who is a First Nation author, and it's an Alaskan legend that she has put in the format of a novel, and I loved it. And finally, I have Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. And I must say I'm quite confused by that series by Wells, because when I read the first novella, I didn't like it that much, but I really wanted to read the other ones, so I read Artificial Condition and I liked it, but not, it wasn't one of my favorite books when I read it, but I can't stop thinking about it since I've read it, so I still included it in my favorite novels. The statistics I decided to include in my spread are the repetitions between female writers and male writers, because I want to make sure I read a lot of female writers. I ended up reading 73% of books written by women and 27% written by male. It's usually more women authors that I have, but because I've reread all of the trilogies by Pierre Bottero, I had a lot of books by men. The second pie chart is a repetitions of the different nationalities of the authors. I read 31% of French books and 26% of American authors. Usually I don't have as many French books, but because I reread the Pierre Bottero, that shot up. I also had 2 Russian books. I had Khalil Gibran for Lebanon. I had Saudi Arabia and Uganda. I also had this little graph at the bottom to see the different graphic reads I had. I had French graphic novels, manga, manhwas, and albums. And the last chart is for the different genre of books I read. I have crime stories, classic novels, and fantasy. This year I read 57 novels. I listened to 6 audiobooks. I'm not sure how many graphic novels I read. It's been several years since I read so many novels. Last year I think I was at 12 or something, so after a few years of difficult moments personally, it was really nice to go back into reading and to be helped by it, really. So I'm sorry if I talked super quickly in this video, but I had a lot to say. I had a lot to rant about for Jane Eyre, and I had a lot of love to talk about for Khalil Gibran. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!